Greetings and welcome to 303 and Senior English A. We are engaged in a close reading of the general prologue of Canterbury Tales. I'm with you in your hymnals on page 100 and following. We're now going to turn, we've done the knight, the squire, the yeoman, and we now are going to turn to look at three religious, write that word down, three religious, that is to say, three people who are affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church. Chaucer's largest group represented in the general prologue are these religious. And as we will say in future lectures and have already said, one of Chaucer's major projects is that he is going to critique or criticize problems within the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. Now that's significant because Chaucer dies in 1400. Luther doesn't nail his famous theses on a wall until 1517. So 100 years before Luther, you have in Chaucer already challenging to some degree the ideas of religious that sometimes are not so religious, if you'll forgive the pun. Now let's go ahead and turn first to our nun. We are told she is a prioress, that is a top-ranking nun within the abbey. Let's take a look at her and let's point out, we're going to see some examples here of, first with the nun prioress, we're going to see some examples of Horatian satire, soft or gentle satire, and when we hit it, we'll point it out. Let's go ahead and read. I'm on page 100, line 122. There was a nun, a prioress, her way of smiling very simple and coy. Her greatest oath was only by St. Loy. And she was known as Magnum Eglantine. And well she sang a verse with a fine intoning through her nose, as was most seemly. And she spoke daintily in French extremely after the school of Stratford at Bow. French in the Paris style she did not know. Let's go ahead and write that down at line 130. Chaucer will say about her, she loved to talk French, but there was a problem. She didn't talk the kind of French that they talk in Paris. Well, now what exactly does this mean? Well, it means that she actually doesn't know French, but she knows a few phrases of French and she will repeat them. Why would she do that? People who don't know French would assume that she's actually speaking French. So it's a way for Chaucer to say, not in a mean way, right? She can at times be a little bit of a hypocrite. Now Chaucer will later say some nasty things about some of these religious and call them outright hypocrites, but here we're not going to get that level of satire again. This is more Horatian, not Juvenalian satire. Let's keep reading. French in the Paris style she did not know. At meat her manners were well taught withal. No morsel from her lips did she let fall, nor dipped her fingers in the sauce too deep. But she could carry a morsel up and keep the smallest drop from falling on her breast. In other words, he points out she knows how to eat with manners. Okay? In other words, when she picks up her meat, and here notice, you eat your meat with your fingers. Right? Not so much with silverware, but with your fingers. And he says about her, when she eats, she doesn't drip a lot of the gravy or whatever all over her chest or her breast. In other words, she's more dainty in her eating style. For courtliness, she had a special zest. And she would wipe her upper lips so clean that not a trace of grease was to be seen upon the cup when she had drunk. In other words, she was able to show her table. She had good table manners. To eat, I'm at the top of page 101. To eat, she stretched a hand sedately for the meat. In other words, she didn't just reach out and grab it really hard. She would kind of look, pinch it. Chaucer is already telling us that she likes to eat, which tells us that maybe she's not going to be the smallest of nun prioresses. We'll keep reading here. She certainly was very entertaining, pleasant and friendly in her ways, and straining to counterfeit a courtly kind of grace, a stately bearing fitting to her place, and to seem dignified in all her dealings. As for her sympathies and tender feelings, she was so charitably solicitous, she used to weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap, or if it were dead or bleeding. In other words, we're told a couple of things about her. She's not actually part of the court, but she likes to kind of play like she is, pretend like she is. In other words, she has a certain kind of manners that would make people think that maybe she's a little more upper class than she actually is. Secondly, we're told she loves animals and she'll be sad if she even sees a mouse caught in a trap. Line 150, to continue with the animals. And she had little dogs she would be feeding with roasted flesh or milk or fine white bread. And bitterly she wept if one were dead or someone took a stick and made it smart. She was all sentiment and tender heart. In other words, let's just say it out loud. She's a sweet lady, right? She has a good heart. Let's write that one down. She's a sweet lady. She has a good heart. She's gentle. She's kind, even to animals. Notice we're going to be told now about her dress and the way she dresses, as we have already said. Dress will say something often about Chaucer's characters. Line 155. Her veil was gathered in a seemly way. Her nose was elegant, her eyes glass gray. Her mouth was very small but soft and red. Her forehead certainly was fair of spread, almost a span across the bows, I own. She was indeed by no means undergrown. Now let's pause at that line 160. We'll definitely write that one down. What does that mean? I once saw a guy who weighed over 400 pounds and he had a t-shirt on, and across the front of it it said, "I conquered anorexia." You can kind of get a sense of the Chaucerian satire game that's being played here. Look again at line 160. She was indeed by no means undergrown is a simple way, a gentle way, again, a Horatianly satiric way of him saying she's a little bit large, which will explain why she likes to eat so much, right? Okay, but notice Chaucer's not mean about it. This is not Juvenalian satire. He's not being mean about it. He's just saying she's a nun-prioress that likes to eat and probably has eaten a little more than she should, and she's a little larger than she probably should be. She was indeed by no means undergrown. Her cloak, I noticed, had a graceful charm. She wore a coral trinket on her arm, a set of beads, the gaudies tricked in green, whence hung a golden brooch of brightest sheen, on which there first was graven a crowned A, and then underneath that we're going to have some words. She actually has a little like medallion, and the words in Latin say, "Love conquers all." So, in other words, Chaucer is, this seems to be one of his favorites. Let's write it down. He likes her. She is happy. She is cheerful. She loves animals. She has these little dogs she likes to feed. She's very dainty when she eats. She just likes to eat a lot, he will point out, right? And she has this little medallion that in Latin says, "Love conquers all." We're told another nun, the chamberlain at her cell, was writing with her, and 3 priests as well. So let's add them really quickly. We're going to add 3 priests and another nun. Okay, and so we'll have then that number of additionally 4, which is again going to make this number of 29 somewhat disputed as to exactly the total number that we've got. From the nun prioress, the second of the religious that Chaucer is going to introduce us to on page 101, we're going to have a monk. Now, let's point out, about being a religious, if you are a good religious, 2 things really important. Okay, we've said this in other lectures, but let's say it here again, just to be sure. 1, if you are a good religious, absolutely no hanky-panky. It is not allowed. Right? You have taken vows of what's called celibacy, and you are not supposed to hanky-panky. No lovemaking, no copulating, no hanky-panky of any kind. It is not allowed. Number 2, if you have taken religious orders, you are not supposed to be rich. You are supposed to give all your money away, and you are not supposed to be greedy or care about money, okay? Now, that's important because we're going to meet now some religious for Chaucer that are something other than maybe always so religious. We're going to move from some Horatian satire to some Juvenalian satire. That is to say, some of the satire now we're about to see is going to be a little bit more mean and biting. Let's take a look. The first we're going to meet is the monk. I'm on page 101. A monk there was, one of the finest sort, who rode the country. Hunting was his sport. a manly man to be an abbot able. Many a dainty horse he had in stable. His bridle when he rode a man might hear, jingling in a whistling ear, wind as clear, aye, and as loud as does the chapel bell. Where my lord monk was prior of the cell. In other words, he's a prior of a cell, he's a monk, but he likes to spend a lot of time out riding his ponies around. And he has lots of ponies. So right away, Chaucer is already telling us something about this religious monk. He is not always so religious. He doesn't always observe the rules of being a monk. The rule of good Saint Bennet or Saint Mar, as old and strict, he tended to ignore. He let go by the things of yesterday, I'm at the top of page 102, and took the modern world's more spacious way. This is a gentle way of him saying that our monk is a new kind of monk. That is to say, really no monk at all. He doesn't like to have to keep the rules of the old order, right? He did not rate that text as a plucked hen, which says that hunters are not holy men and that a monk uncloistered is a mere fish out of water flapping on the pier. That is to say, a monk out of his cloister. Instead of praying all day long in his bedroom, in his cloister, our monk likes to go out on his ponies and go hunting. That is to say, he breaks the rules. That is to say, he's iconoclastic. We might want to write that one down in our notes. That is to say, he goes against the rules, right? Okay. And notice Chaucer. He says with this monk, I agreed, and said his views were sound. Was he to study till his head went round, poring over books in cloisters? Must he toil as Austin, St. Augustine, bade, and till the very soil? Was he to leave the world upon the shelf? Let Austin have his labor to himself. This monk was therefore a good man to horse. Greyhounds he had, as swift as birds to course. Hunting a hare or riding at a fence was all his fun. He spared for no expense. In other words, he has lots of money as well. I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine gray fur, the finest in the land, and on his hood, to fasten it to his chin, he had a wrought gold cunningly fashioned pin. Into a lover's knot it seemed to pass. This seems to suggest that our monk might enjoy a little bit of hanky-panky on the side as well as hunting, which is a major naughty as well. His head was bald and shone like looking glass, so did his face, as if it had been greased. He was a fat and personable priest. You could make the argument that this kind of stereotype of the rich, of the kind of roly-poly, fun-loving, likes to sing and drink his wine and go out in the woods kind of priest is in many ways begun here. For those of us that know any of the stories of Robin Hood, we know about this kind of stereotypic priest, and here we met him. His prominent eyeballs never seemed to settle. Whoa, look at Chaucer's genius of creating these what we call character sketches. He says his eyes are always kind of looking around, looking like he's trying to figure out what he wants next. They glittered like the flames beneath a kettle. Subtle his boots, his horse in fine condition. He was a prelate fit for exhibition. He was not pale like a tormented soul. He liked the fat swan best and roasted whole he loves to eat. His palfrey was as brown as is a berry. So in other words, we're told about this monk. This monk loves to kind of have a good time. In other words, he is not really a very religious, if you get my drift. Okay, so let's write it down as that. Having said that, though, and the fact that Chaucer says, I kind of agreed with his view. Why should we be like all those old-fashioned monks? We should have kind of like new age types of monks who like to go out and have a good time. They like to dress well. They like to eat well. They like to hunt well. And Chaucer says, I kind of agreed with him on that count. Now, of course, this begs a question. Let's write it in our notes. If this is the kind of monk, religious, what kind of story will he tell? And the monk's tale is one of those tales which we don't teach in high school. You can read it on your own and maybe wonder why we don't teach that story in high school, okay? We now will move from a certain kind of satire of Chaucer's where he is making fun of the monk to satirizing the monk to now out write Juvenalian satire. We've mentioned already our Friar in an earlier lecture when we were talking about Chaucer's agenda. Now we're going to look at all of these lines. And right away, readers of this poem, when they met this Friar, they immediately recognized Chaucer was being very nasty in his satire. We now are going to see an example of Juvenalian satire. Just to remind, Juvenal, the great Roman satirist, nasty. Horatian satire is when somebody makes fun of you and you laugh back. Haha, that's funny, good one. Juvenalian satire is when somebody makes fun of you and you're ready to punch them in the throat because you don't like the thing that they just said about you. This is an example of Juvenalian satire. Let's take a look. I'm on page 102, line 213 or so. There was a friar, right? A wanton one and merry, a limiter, a very festive fellow. In all four orders there was none so mellow, so glib with gallant phrase and well-tuned speech. He fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. He was a noble pillar to his order. Whoa! Now, as I've already said in an earlier lecture, let's just point out that even in translation, we're lost here unless we have some better translation. If I were to say it this way, there was a preacher along on the journey with us. He was a real slut. Whoa. So right away you can imagine readers will go, whoa, 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 what are you talking about, a real slut? Preachers are not supposed to sleep with lots. No, we're not even near being finished. We're told next that he goes into his church and he finds young girls. He will mess around with them and then he will marry them off to men in his church. Whoa! As if that's not bad enough for Chaucerian satire, look again at the final line. He was a noble pillar to his order. In other words, he was one of the best in this order. In other words, this is the way all of these friars behaved. Whoa, you can imagine that Chaucer would be attacked, and he was, for this kind of writing. Where is this friar? We want to go and find him. Well, of course, Chaucer made him up, didn't he? But Chaucer must have known one or two religious who were a little less than religious, and so he points it out this way. We'll continue. Let's just read a few lines and write down, hey, already. Obviously, we want to know, if this is the kind of guy that Chaucer's telling us about, what kind of story will the Friar's Tale be? And again, you can read it on your own, not one that we can teach in our high school, okay? So let's take a look at what he says about him. Highly beloved and intimate was he. It's a nasty word, intimate, because it can have multiple meanings. It can mean friendly, but it can also obviously mean that you have sexual activity going on. Top of page 103. With country folk within his boundary, and city dames of honor and possessions, for he was qualified to hear confessions, or so he said, with more than priestly scope. He had a special license from the Pope. Sweetly he heard his penance at shrift, with pleasant absolution for a gift. Now this will be Chaucer's first mention of what will later be a major part of the Reformation. Later, of course, the Protestant Reformation. If you grew up going to church on Sunday school and it was not a Catholic church, you went to a Protestant group. That Protestant or protest movement happens when guys like Luther make some observations about how the Catholic Church has problems. But as we're pointing out here, notice already 100 years before, Chaucer is pointing out that what the friar likes to do is to hear confessions, and he likes to take money from wealthy people when he hears these confessions. It's a way for him to get wealthy. So already our friar is clearly breaking the two major rules of being a good religious. He likes to hanky-panky and he likes money. Okay, he's greedy. We'll keep reading. Notice where he could hope to make, he was an easy man in penance giving, where he could hope to make a decent living. In other words, he likes to say that he has the special license from the Pope. Notice Chaucer, this is what he said, which seems to suggest for Chaucer, I didn't really believe that he had the special license from the Pope. But this is a way for him to make a living. He'd make a lot of money this way, which is obviously dishonest, right? It's a sure sign whenever gifts are given to a poor order that a man's well shriven. Notice Chaucer already pointing out this idea that if you find really wealthy religious orders, the reason they're so wealthy might be because they're kind of violating some of the foundational rules about you're not supposed to take lots of money. And should he give enough, he knew in verity, the penitent repented in sincerity. In other words, this is interesting satire. He says, even though the friar was kind of a cheat, He still led people to believe that they were being forgiven for their sins as long as they made confession and they paid proper penance. Chaucer seems to almost be saying it's okay, but this is where we're going to find his satire. It may be clear to us that Chaucer doesn't think this is a very good thing at all. Again, this is part of that, what we call the Chaucerian project, where he is trying to make some observations, some political observations about what's wrong with the church of Chaucer's day. Notice we'll continue. For many a fellow is so hard of heart, he cannot weep for all his inward smart. Therefore, instead of weeping and of prayer, one should give silver for a poor friar's care. He kept his tippet stuffed with pins for curls and pocket knives to give to pretty girls, and certainly his voice was gay and sturdy, for he sang well and played the hurdy-gurdy. At sing-songs, he was champion of the hour. His neck was whiter than a lily flower, but strong enough to butt a bruiser down. He knew the tavern well in every town. So he likes to go to the bars. And every innkeeper and barmaid too, better than lepers, beggars, and that crew. In other words, Chaucer says about him, he loves to hang out at the bars, he loves barmaids. In other words, he is spending way more time outside of church doing hanky-pankying and that kind of thing than he should be. Chaucer here, notice he is going to continue. For in so eminent a man as he, it was not fitting with the dignity of his position, dealing with a scum of wretched lepers. Nothing good can come of dealings with the slum and gutter dwellers, but only with the rich and victual sellers. In other words, he's going to make the observation that this friar does not believe that his job as a priest is to go and help the poor and the lowly, the lepers, the sick. No. They don't have any money. He says this friar liked to hang out with the people who had money, and he liked to hang out with beautiful women at the bars. Clearly, readers of this time period are going to see this as a major problem. This is not the right thing to be saying. Let's keep reading. But anywhere a profit might accrue, courteous he was and lowly of service too. Natural gifts like his were hard to match. He was the finest beggar of his batch, and for his begging district paid a rent. His brethren did no poaching where he went, for though a widow mightn't have a shoe, so pleasant was his holy how do you do. Got his farthing from her just the same. I'm at the top of 104 before he left, and so his income came to more than he laid out. And how he romped, just like a puppy. He was ever prompt to attribute disputes, to arbitrate disputes on settling days for a small fee in many